We're here with Matthew Goldman with Ericsson. Matthew, we're here at the Technical University of Munich at the standards meeting, and I specifically wanted to talk to you about 4K and ultra-high definition television. Can you tell us a little bit about ultra-high definition television now, where it's at?
Sure. As most people are aware, ultra-high definition television is one of the hottest new topics that are out there. We just came to Munich from the International Broadcasters Conference in Amsterdam, which is one of the two largest conferences or conventions per year for our industry, in the broadcast industry, the other one being the National Association of Broadcasters in April. And one of the biggest topics there was ultra-high definition television. And so it's really popular now because the consumer electronic companies have now started to come out with the ultra-high def. So there's a couple different names for it. It is called 4K in many cases, and there's also 8K, which is the second format. But we should be careful here because there's also a 4K cinema format, which is slightly different. So it's okay to use 4K, but it has to be followed by 4K TV or 4K ultra high definition TV. The format's slightly different. But the nice thing about it is in these two formats, with the consumer sets coming out with the ultra high definition now, they are referring to having 4 times the spatial resolution of high definition today. And then there's also, that's known in the SMPTE standards, which is SMPTE 2036, as ultra high definition television level 1, or just UHDTV 1. Right. There's also an even larger format, which is 16 times the resolution of today's ultra high definition, which is known as either 8K UHDTV or UHDTV level 2 in the SMPTE standards. So there's the colloquial names and there's the official names. So you'll see a few different names about it, but the key behind this is ultra high definition television has 2 levels, one that's 4 times the spatial resolution of the current HD and one that's 16 times. And the 16 times one is a little bit further out into the future. NHK, Japan broadcaster, has really been driving that industry for something that would happen in like the 2020 year range. But right now, 4K UHD TV is here right now, and it's actually more rapidly picking up than some of the industry analysts had figured it would. Figuring, well, what can you really see it? Is it really practical to do it? Right. And I'm assuming that based on the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas in January of this year, where the sets first premiered, National Association of Broadcasters show in April, and now the IBC in Amsterdam, any case of anybody walking by and seeing true 4K UHD TV, there's no doubt how immersive and how much better the picture quality works. And I guess it should point out this. It is a common misnomer that to have 4 times the spatial resolution is all that 4K UHD TV is. And in fact, it's more than that. It's really the immersive feeling you get when you're viewing this, and it's much more immersive than high definition. And the reason is because due to the 4 times the spatial resolution, the increase in that, the distance of resolution that your eye can see, you can sit much closer in relationship to the size of the screen. In fact, about half the distance to a screen that you would for a high definition. So if you think about the human visual system, we can see roughly around 180 degrees, but that includes our peripheral vision as well. Our central field of vision is roughly about 90 to 100 degrees. And if you sit at the proper viewing distance from a high definition TV, about 30% of your vision is a television set. And the reason why you're sitting there is if you sit too close, you'll start to see the structure of the screen and the pixels on the screen. Right. If you sit too far away, you won't even recognize the resolution because you can't resolve that directly. So at that proper viewing distance with ultra high definition for UHD TV level 1, you're sitting at about half the distance related to the size of the screen. So now instead of it being 30% of your central field of vision, it's now going to be about 60% of your central field of vision, which means 2/3 of your active part of your vision is taken up by the set. That naturally gives you a more immersive feeling. But that also means now that anything you watch on that display, the angular motion or the arc angle that you're viewing is now much wider because it's filling up 60 degrees of your view. So it's not just about spatial resolution. If you have high motion, which is very, very common in sport and sporting material, then you want to be careful that the frame rate or the amount that the material is refreshed is high enough that you don't see motion blur, or also another effect, which is like a stuttering in the motion, which in the industry we call motion judder, which is where your eye is perceiving where the motion of the object will go to, but in fact, when it's shown on the display, it doesn't actually fit the right timing, and so your brain has to make an adjustment for that. And motion blur is caused because there's not enough resolution in the motion of the image, and so it smears the image in your eye. So now we have 4 times the spatial resolution and at least twice, and right now it's very common to have twice the temporal resolution or frame rate. And the other thing is, because you're again much closer to the screen, and this is a function of how much imaging you can see, then you have to be careful, because with standard digital television that's delivered to the home today, the bit values in the digital domain are all 8 bits. And 8 bits means you can represent brightness and color, or which in other words known as luma and chroma, up to 2 to the 8 or 256 level. That's fine in most cases, but if you have a still screen and you have a slightly varying contour or blending of colors, such as you would get in a sunset or across a blue sky, you can't recognize it. You get what's known as stepping or quantization factors in there, where you see banding in the color. The gradients in the color, right. So you really need beyond the 8-bit that today's high definition does. And the good news is, with ultra high definition, it's 10-bit or higher. And so one of the nice things about that is now you have, if you use 10 bits, that's 2 to the 10 or 1024 levels, and that's enough to smooth out most of that gradient or the contouring on there.
So even if you're not sitting close, I mean, just going from 8 to 10 bit is just a nice jump in itself, you know, in terms of picture quality.
Right, and actually, to come back to this, you can even see this issue with today's high definition TV. If it's a night scene and it's been compressed, a lot of times you can see the contouring of the image. So whether it's high definition or ultra high definition, you will see these bandings and colors. And it's just, you see it even at a normal HD viewing distance, but it's exacerbated by being closer to the screen. It's that more immersive feeling again. Yeah. So you get the high motion sports, the higher angle of crossing your central field of vision. You want to avoid motion jutter, so you need a higher frame rate. It's higher resolution, so you can see things a lot better, and that's why you need the higher data precision as well, the minimum 10 bits.
So, you know, you spoke about the sports and the motion, the jutter. No, Ericsson did a demo of this at IBC, didn't they? And can you briefly describe what
we did. Actually, this is the world's first inter-country or intercontinental, really inter-country demo of live, very important to understand, it's live, true 4K ultra high definition. And what I mean by true about this is, for sporting, you definitely need that higher frame rate and that 10-bit resolution, versus motion pictures, which a lot of them can be done in what they call 4K resolution, which is 4 times the spatial resolution, but it's still only 24 frames a second, and in many cases it's only 8-bit. So this is where the reality is. And of course, with films, you're willing to be a little bit of a surrealistic value. It's an artistic value in that. For live action sports, you want it to look like you're there, like you're just looking through a window or actually at the venue.
Exactly.
So you need that high bit. So what we did for IBC, and this was actually live on the show floor at IBC, it was multiple companies working together. It was Ericsson, along with British Telecom and Intelsat and Sony. We came together and we did this live demo, and it's a pretty complicated system for doing that, which really hasn't been tried before, because the 4K ultra high definition workflow of the end-to-end production system is really in its infancy now. It's just being put into play, and in some cases not everything is well defined. But what we did was, we went to a rugby match outside of London, and we actually brought 3 Sony F55 ultra high definition cameras there with the Sony switcher, and we had a producer and cameraman, we had a live production crew there. We then were basically watching the event live through these cameras, and we'd switch to one of those feeds locally at the venue, and that's, I guess to be clear about this, true 4K ultra high definition is 12 gigabits per second of raw data. Now most networks, as you know, 12 gigabits per second would be insurmountable, the amount of bandwidth you would have to use. So we then took it to our contribution encoder on site, and we compressed that 12 gigabits per second down to 100 megabits per second.
Wow.
So about 121 times compression efficiency. And the pictures still look great. We did it on site, and then there was a fiber presence at the facility there, and it went on the BT fiber network to London to the BT point of presence. There it switched over, believe it or not, to another fiber network, which is called Intelsat 1, And the Intelsat signal on fiber was then brought to Germany. And here we go again. We crossed a third network because Intelsat then sent it to their teleport. It was uplinked onto Thor 6, which is one of their satellites. Right. And then at the IBC Center itself, we had a 2.4 meter dish outside where we actually captured that 4K UHD TV signal that had been compressed, at the venue site and through these 3 different networks. We then brought it down into the Ericsson booth, the Intelsat booth, and the Sony booth. And in those booths, each one of those booths had the Ericsson professional integrated receiver decoder, which then took that compressed signal, returned it back to be a 12 gigabit per second set of signals, and fed it to consumer 4K UHD TV monitors. And each one of us had different monitors there, but the minimum size that we had to in the Intelsat and the Ericsson booth, they were 7-foot diagonals or 84-inch diagonals. The Sony booth had smaller and larger ones. As a matter of fact, they had a 6-meter diagonal screen there as well. And it took a little bit working with the production crew because, as you know, when you switch from SD to HD, how you produce is different. You don't want a lot of those tight-in shots, particularly with jerky or fast zoom motions or cuts. Things have to be more gradual, zooming in and out, more gradual pans, because there's so much information for your eye to see. Just like when you're at the venue, you're constantly looking at different points on the screen. So we have to let the viewer do that. And it took a few weeks of testing ahead of time for these expert camera crews to film differently, or film. It's not really filming, as you know, it's capturing the force of habit. And capturing the image that is there in a method that's easier for ultra high definition than it is for HD. And it looked absolutely stunning.
So did you have big crowds at the booth?
We had a huge crowd. I mean,
people were excited?
Oh, yeah. I mean, up to this point, there's been some question, and a lot of people in the industry have said, well, can you really see 4K in the home? So we wanted to use consumer equipment. So we had people standing in a booth with the consumer equipment, and of course it's quite bright in the show hall, so it could even mirror the consumer environment. It wasn't dark like in a movie theater. And people were walking by, and there's always this question, can you see it or not? They were standing at the proper distance away from the display, and I was standing in the audience, and we probably had 50 or 60 people standing around our booth at Intelsat. Sony had multiple screens, so my understanding was they had hundreds of people there viewing this thing. And all 3 of us came back, when we talked about it afterwards, people were saying, I get it. In other words, no question about it, no marketing terms. People are saying, I now understand when I look at true 4K UHD, how immersive and how fantastic that is. And it's not the same, because there's lots of services out there that are providing ultra high definition or 4K in movies. The difference is with live action sport, it's not like a movie where it's a surreal experience. You want to look like you're having a window into the game and really there. And that's where the higher frame rate and the bit depth, along with the spatial resolution, really did matter because of that immersive feeling.
So, we spoke about the payload, and 12 gigabits came up, and so obviously it's a challenge for broadcasters. I mean, other than payload, are there any other challenges that are attributed to broadcasting UHD?
Well, there's tons, all the way through, because you have the higher bandwidth that's required, but everything else for real-time broadcasting is the same as before. We haven't really talked here about audio formats, and of course, we were at a live venue there, so we just had the mic from the referee. So there was no commentator, so it actually felt like you were there because you didn't hear any commentation. Right. But obviously, when this becomes more mainstream, they'll probably have a bigger production. At a minimum, it will be 5.1. There's lots of talk about doing the full next generation audio, which could be 22.2, although perhaps that's a bit of a challenge to do at a local venue. But you can see these are the types of challenges you can have for that. The other area is if you're not going to carry it around uncompressed, so you need compressors. So then the industry is still deciding what are the best ways to do that, and that'll roll out over the next year or two as we get the whole ecosystem together.
And HEVC solves part of that problem, right?
So for
the high efficiency video.
Right. So one of the things in order to bring it, what we were talking about here for this demonstration was more of a content acquisition and content distribution, and that's what this equipment is here for now, to show how beautiful 4K UHD TV can, and get that business model to be understood. Because if you do something that's not yet mature and you don't show the difference, you get kind of a response from consumers. So, but in order to actually deliver to the home, you're clearly not going to be using 100 megabits per second, which is what this demo was, because you have to be able to fit it into existing bandwidth, and there's a big bandwidth constraints. that's going on right now. And there's always more content now. This is going to take up more bandwidth. So
can a standard home internet connection of, let's say, 30 megabits, can it handle a 4K stream?
it can if you use the next generation of video compression. That's what it's going to. So the state of the art now for video compression is known as advanced video coding, or AVC. Sometimes people will call it MPEG-4. Or H.264, which is all the same standard. AVC is the state of the art today, which actually has twice the efficiency of MPEG-2 video, which in some parts of the world, like the United States, that is the broadcasting standard for it. But high efficiency video coding, which is the next step in this, was standardized in January of this year for direct-to-home application. That promises to yet again be half the bit rate of AVC, which is now 1/4 the bit rate of MPEG-2. So what was commonly done for broadcast, for instance, in the US, is you might have HD video taking between 10 and 18 megabits per second. And then so now this promises to be 1/4 of that rate for
That's
HD.
with the audio channels,
With
right?
the audio channels. So it'll be 1/4 that rate for HD. But now you have 4 times the resolution and twice the spatial resolution, twice the temporal resolution, and a higher bit rate, a higher bit density, I should say, 10 bits versus 8 bits. So the question comes into play. We've done some research in our lab, and yes, we do believe in existing bandwidth with true 4K. It'll be in that general area where you'll be able to bring it in, definitely under 30 megabits per second to enjoy that. And this is for, again, true 4K, which is the P60, progressive frame 60, and the 10 bits for doing that. But that, in order to demonstrate that, you can do that now. There's some early high-efficiency video coding solutions out there, including from my own company. We announced a live HEVC encoder, actually at IBC of 2012. But it can only do lower resolutions. It can't do ultra-high definition.
What's the name of that encoder?
That's the SVP 5500. Okay. So what we're seeing is the adoption of HEVC is going to depend on the market. So it's already pretty much mature for LTE broadcast, which is the mobile networks, and this year, through the end of this year, it's starting to be introduced, and throughout probably the middle of next year, for over-the-top applications. And you mentioned one earlier, which was Netflix doing that.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that because you spoke about it going mainstream, and we know 4K is coming from
Right.
Netflix.
So before
Sony has that little box where they have
Right.
their pictures, and that's a delivery right to that display device, though. But I mean, do you see it going mainstream anytime? I mean, when do you see it going
Right, that's what I'm saying. So as it's rolling out, over the top will be throughout 2014. But for the broadcast network, you're actually going to be broadcasting maybe through the multi-programming video distributors, et cetera. So it's digital cable or direct broadcast satellite, or even for terrestrial. It's going to take a little bit longer to do that because you're not going to, unless it's greenfield, you are not going to roll out a replacement system. In other words, you need a new set-top box and a receiver, only to replace it again a year later. So most people, once they realize that 4K ultra-high definition is here, they want to wait for the technology to be mature enough so you can do live delivery of 4K UHD to the home if you're going to swap equipment. So even though over the top you can do it starting now throughout 2014, the maturity of the ecosystem to do it for live broadcast is probably not going to be until 2015, and that will give time for the silicon chips for consumer devices to become available, be systemized. At the same time, also, don't forget it's different here. We're not offline encoding. This is live encoding. And so you really want to get that 50% bit rate gain on HEVC. And most of the live encoders for HEVC today are doing somewhere between 15 and 25% because they're new, they're software based. You really need a much more powerful platform. Just to give you an example of it, if you compare the amount of compression processing power you need to go from high definition with AVC, which is the state of the art now, to doing 4K ultra high definition television, especially true 4K ultra high definition television, using HEVC, you're looking at about 80 times the processing power to start with, because HEVC is about 10 times more processing power than AVC. You got 4 times the spatial resolution and twice the temporal resolution. So that's when you start from the uncompressed domain to the compressed domain. So obviously it's going to be a while before those roll out. So we're looking at 2015 for the mainstream, and then of course that will start to roll out in 2016. It'll become much more commonplace.
Okay, so obviously standards are very important in all this, and SMPTE is doing some great work in this. Can you talk a little bit about, I know that the UHDTV report just came out. that we published. Can you tell us a little bit about what SMPTE's involvement is in this and the history of that?
Right. So, of course, SMPTE's been one of the pathfinders for ultra high definition. Coming out in 2009, SMPTE Standard 2036 really defined the two levels of ultra high definition. Level 1 being the one we spent most of our time talking about, which is the 4 times the spatial resolution of HD, and also, of course, the 8K UHD, or level 2, UHDTV 2, which is the 16 times the HD resolution of today. So we were pioneers in that area. Now, since then, with a more practical delivery of devices now towards this, there's been some refinements on that. And there's all sorts of issues that come to play, one of which, just getting into, is with 12 gigabits per second to do contribution feeds, and if you're going to do 3D, that would be 24, right? So we haven't talked about 3D.
Right.
So it puts a stress on our current professional interfaces. The state of the art for SMPTE for professional interfaces, which SMPTE as defined, is the 3G SDI. And so SMPTE's, through this report, is saying it's time for us now to get higher bit rates on a single link. So we're looking at doing multiple links of higher capability or higher processing in the cables. So we have single link, 6 gigabits, 12 gigabits, and so on. And that's the new work that we're doing in there. The other thing that's in the report is to talk about how you handle the workflow of this as well, because it is a lot more information. Plus, you're adding multi-dimensions with audio. Maybe things are going to be object-based as well, and extend beyond the metadata that's available right now. So that's what the report had done. There's several areas to kick off with. One thing we've only touched upon briefly is we haven't talked about colorimetry space that matches the eye. The new work item is going to do a mapping between the HD color space and the ultra high definition color space, which, by the way, this is not really that much different than what happened in the workflows. We went from standard definition to high definition. This is the next logical step along the way.
Right. No, it's all great stuff, man. I want to see that demo.
Yeah, absolutely. We can show it to you anytime.
Yeah. So you can find more about the UHDTV report at SMPTE.org and learn more about our standards at standards.smpt.org. Thanks, Matthew.